Chapter 1, Shadows Beneath the Splendor. December 27th, 1992. Christmas had just passed, and Oxford Street in London's West End was already alive with noise and color. Crowds of muggles dressed in brand new clothes filled the streets. Children laughed and played. Young people gathered in groups, exchanging heartfelt New Year's wishes. Everyone carried within them the hope of a brighter future, and not even the swirling snowfall could dampen the smiles on their faces. For wizards, Christmas was no less important a holiday, but their way of celebrating differed greatly from that of muggles. Wizards preferred to stay indoors, wrapped in warmth, listening to the crackle of firewood in the hearth, sitting beneath Christmas trees glittering with silver frost and mistletoe, and talking about Quidditch or the latest news. That was why Diagon Alley, the heart of wizarding commerce, always felt unusually deserted in the days around the New Year, and Nocturne Alley even more so, since it was scarcely lively even on ordinary days. Clang, clang, clatter! Amasta stepped down from a cart identical to the ones at Gringotts, his figure hidden beneath a wide black cloak. Though his stomach churned with nausea, he forced himself to appear calm and indifferent, keeping up the mask of cold detachment he had carefully crafted. The air reeked of fermented slug slime steeped with rotting frog entrails. The uneven ground was slick with moisture. Rows of inverted torches hovered in the air, their ghostly green flames casting eerie light across the vast fan-shaped cavern, painting the underground market in sinister hues. Amasta's gaze swept the scene. 200 feet to his left lay the pet market. There, chained with links as thick as a man's arm, slumped a troll nearly 15 feet tall. Its strength seemed drained, its massive body sagging until it almost blended into the black stone wall. Its owner, a toothless old witch from Moldova, had brought the troll here hoping to sell it for a decent price. With that money, she dreamed of curing the dragonpox sores that plagued her. Unfortunately, 2 years had passed, and still no buyer had come forward. At this moment, the old witch leaned wearily against the troll's massive toes, shouting curses at a group of nearby house elves, blaming them for fouling the place. These were elves without masters, creatures abandoned to freedom. Of course, to call it freedom was as cruel as calling centaurs beasts. Gratitude was not what the word inspired. Most of these poor creatures had once served small wizarding families or secretive magical sects, but when their masters vanished into the currents of time for one reason or another, the elves were left masterless, burdened with a freedom they neither wanted nor understood. For house elves, life without a master was terrifying, stripping them of their very reason to exist. And so they gathered here, clinging to the desperate hope of finding new owners. But truthfully, apart from dark wizards seeking living subjects for their spellwork or potion experiments, hardly anyone paid them any mind. The troll, however, seemed fond of the elves. Amasta had once seen it go mad with hunger, swatting half a dozen of the little creatures in a single blow and shoving them into its mouth, crunching them with grotesque delight. Aside from trolls and house elves, the pet market, whose stench rivaled that of a filthy lavatory, offered many other curious sights. Centaurs stripped of their herd's protection, Vila unlucky enough to be captured, always in demand, vampires locked in cages, and even Irish leprechauns, excellent material for experiments. In short, barring taboo creatures like dragons and unicorns, one could find nearly every other magical species in existence within this underground bazaar. On the right side, beneath the stone walls, the trading stalls retained the crude style of medieval Europe. But what lay spread upon those bare mats was anything but simple. Black magic tomes tracing their roots back to ancient Greece. Potions that promised vast surges of magical power, but carried mysterious side effects. Alchemical weapons capable of extinguishing life across wide swaths in an instant. Compared with such wares, the goods sold in Borgin and Berks seemed like toys for mischievous schoolboys. Even Devil's Snare was here reduced to little more than ornamental greenery. Amasta had even seen in the possession of an Italian wizard a curse seed of the infamous Black Death, the very plague that once ravaged all of Europe. The seller claimed it had been weakened, but if unleashed, it could still wipe out a Muggle city with little effort. Of course, such a curse came with a price as dreadful as its power. Otherwise, Amasta might have been tempted to buy it, if only to study it. And this was the shadowed face of the wizarding world, a place where no laws reached, a true land of the Forsaken. After a while, once he felt steadier, Amasta moved toward the center of the cavern, blending into the sparse trickle of people. Most of those active here wore black cloaks, unwilling to reveal their true faces. Only a few reckless lunatics, or the occasional foreign wizard merely passing through Britain, dared to show themselves openly under the eyes of the ministry's infiltrated watchmen. Yes, you heard right. Nocturne Alley's underworld harbored secret Auror surveillance posts, but their purpose was only to ensure nothing too excessive occurred here, not to launch a purge, unless, of course, the ministry wanted open war with the remaining old-line wizards and dark sorcerers of Britain. At the cavern's center lay a square marketplace, encircled by low granite walls. At one end stood a towering notice board of snakewood, plastered with hundreds of contracts glowing faintly red with magical seals, silently awaiting someone to tear them free. Amasta scanned the board but found nothing worth his time. He turned, found a stone bench, and sat to await his trading partner. Perhaps because the new year was near, the place was quiet. In the vast space, only two figures whispered together some 10 feet off to the right. One was an old wizard in a rough brown robe, his bald scalp riddled with pustules and scabs, looking every bit the 80-year relic. Hearing Amasta's steps, he raised his head. A sneer twisted his withered mouth, 3 yellow teeth at most flashing as he hissed fetid breath. His face was grotesque, one half charred and blackened like bark after fire, the other crawling with raw, wriggling fleshy nodules like tiny tentacles. But when his gaze fell on the golden serpent embroidered at Amasta's collar, the wizard quickly curbed his sickly grin, gave a polite nod, and looked away. Amasta, however, found the man's ruined face curious. If he guessed right, it was the mark of a failed Horcrux ritual, the backlash from a soul-splitting curse gone wrong. From what Amasta knew, only one thing could slow such damage, and the two men's conversation soon confirmed his suspicion. Not easy to get. Dangerous, too. You should know there's only one place in Britain to find unicorns. The skeletal wizard opposite the elder drew a glass cup from beneath his cloak. Inside shimmered a silver-bright liquid that glowed even in this shadowed cavern. He spoke in a low, careful voice. The old wizard's expression twisted into a shrill laugh of recognition. From his robes, he produced a fist-sized chunk of mithril and tossed it on the table. Of course, of course. Even here, few dare tempt Dumbledore's wrath. I've been waiting a long time for this. You've got nerve. I admire that. Deals in the underworld were always straightforward. Bargaining was rare. If talks failed, killing the other party was the usual solution. Amasta watched with interest as the old wizard lifted the glass, sniffed it carefully, then swallowed. From behind the shifting light and shadow, Amasta's face flickered with amusement. Here, one point must be made clear. Because of the gaps in traditional magical education, wizards of the old schools often reached frightening mastery in one field, while remaining laughably ignorant in another, no better than an apprentice just starting out. Modern school-based magic, by contrast, rarely produced world-shaking prodigies, but at least it trained balanced knowledge. And balance mattered. At least in this very deal, even a Hogwarts student with OWL level proficiency wouldn't be fooled by a confusion draught dressed up with transfiguration and 2 unicorn feathers. Chapter 2. When Predator and Prey Clash. You dare. Some stories give away their ending from the very first line. A furious howl ripped through the gloomy underground market, as sharp and piercing as a werewolf's cry at the sight of a full moon. Mock. 3 seconds after taking the drug that scrambled his mind, the old wizard sprang up. The boils and scabs clustered on his scalp shifted from red to purple and then to black. They began to bubble as if his head were a potion left to boil. The fleshy growths on his face wreathed and swelled, twisting wildly, eager to tear themselves free. Great, rage cracked through him. He raised a short, stubby staff topped with a jewel, his voice rising and falling with fury as he seemed intent on unleashing a vicious curse on the trickster who had duped him. But he had forgotten one crucial fact. In his current state, he could no longer control the violent, corrupted magic coursing through him. Attempting to cast made the power spiral further out of order. He melted like a wax effigy held over flame, the corruption spreading from his scalp down through his body. In the blink of an eye, the once living man had become a black, viscous pool of pus on the floor. Sorry, great. What was it again? The lanky fellow who had been bargaining with the old wizard sneered in a strange, cold chuckle. He yanked the mithril from the table, stuffed it into his robes, and strolled over to inspect the puddle. From the goo, he plucked the elder's abandoned wand and held it up to the hovering torches to admire the ruby set in its tip. Even through the black cloth of his hood, Amasta felt the man's smugness. The lanky man noticed the stare and turned, his expression sour as he glared at Amasta, clearly assuming Amasta intended to double-cross him. He hissed in a low voice, "In a place like this, greed and unchecked curiosity can get you killed in an instant, Golden Viper. Don't think ripping apart a few watchdogs makes everyone fear you." Amasta let out a derisive chuckle. He bent his head and stared long at the pooled slime. After a pause, a hoarse, aged voice came from beneath his hood. "Thanks for the warning, conman, but you seem to have forgotten one thing. Besides greed and curiosity, carelessness can be just as lethal." "What?" Before the lanky man could react, a black shadow with blood-red eyes shot up from the puddle. Like a reaper, it hovered in the air and unleashed a wailing, heart-stopping cry aimed straight at him. "Embrace death with me, shameless one!" The apparition was beyond the lanky man's comprehension. He had no idea of fighting it. He spun to run, but the underground had been sealed with anti-apparition wards, every inch bound, and the nearest fireplace was at least half a mile away. He hadn't cleared the low wall when the towering, death-like shadow overtook him. It dived from the air, opening a maw lined with teeth, and in an instant swallowed both the man and his scream. Crunch, crunch, crunch! The sickening sound of chewing filled the cavern. Blood mixed with splintered bone and brain matter cascaded to the floor like a stream, and the thick, coppery stench of gore made Amasta wince. The old wizard's reaper form was only a final dying convulsion. It could not persist in the world. Having exacted its revenge, the specter faded quickly. Before it vanished entirely, it turned and fixed Amasta with a resentful glare. Its rasping voice brimmed with accusation. "You knew it was fake, yet you did not warn me. Why blame others for your own stupidity?" Amasta replied coldly. "Before I get curious enough about your current state to keep you bottled in glass for decades and then consign you to hell, you'd better disappear." The specter had no answer. With a weary sigh and one last lingering look around, it dissolved and strode into death. A few bystanders had noticed the commotion, but none of them were surprised, and none dared approach to learn the details. As the lanky wizard had said, "In this lawless place, a ravenous curiosity can get you killed as surely as greed can." A sliver of silver light sliced through the gloom. Amasta summoned from the gore the mithril piece pitted with teeth marks, cleaned it until it gleamed, and tucked it casually into his robes, feeling oddly pleased. With a crisp snap of his fingers, golden magical flames sprang up where the pus and the shredded flesh lay. In mere breaths, the fire cleansed the filthy ground and erased the last traces of the two men from the world. Since he had taken something from another, it was only right to see their affairs settled. That, after all, was what one might call a sense of duty. "Seems I've missed quite the performance, haven't I, Mr. Goldviper?" Amasta turned his head toward the voice. Beneath the towering notice board stood a middle-aged wizard, blonde-haired, black-eyed, his expression mild as he offered an amiable smile. "Or perhaps you were simply lucky enough to avoid a mess." Amasta gave a curt nod, his tone indifferent. The man was Cacus Folly, a modestly well-known broker in the underworld, descended from none other than the Sacred 28's Folly family. Once, the Follies had enjoyed immense prestige in the wizarding world. At the peak of their power, a family head had even served as Minister for Magic, their place among the wizarding aristocracy unquestioned. But Hector Folly, minister in those days, lacked the vision to look beyond immediate politics. He dismissed Albus Dumbledore's warnings, fatally underestimating the havoc Gellert Grindelwald, the first Dark Lord in his prime, would bring to Britain and indeed to all of Europe. For that blindness, furious wizards drove him from office. Without the shelter of power, the Follies suffered a crushing blow and slowly faded from sight in Britain's magical society. For 2 or 3 generations, the fallen family sought a way back into prominence. They tried every avenue, yet each path ended in failure. for no matter which road they took, it always led to the same insurmountable figure bearing the way. In truth, Dumbledore himself never moved against the diminished follies. But the wizarding world did not forget that it was Hector's folly, his refusal to heed Dumbledore's counsel, that had left Britain so bloodied in the war against Grindelwald. 50 years passed. The anger toward the follies faded. But Dumbledore endured, still alive, still unchallenged. The Ministry's rulers knew better than to risk provoking the greatest wizard of the age over a family long buried beneath history's dust. At last, with no other recourse, the follies turned to the shadows. They sent one of their few promising heirs into the underworld, willing to risk exposure and retaliation, building wealth and connections in silence, patiently waiting for the chance to step once more into the light. Chapter 3. A New Commission. Amasta weighed the pouch in his hand, its space enlarged by an extension charm. Even with a floating charm dulling the heft, its heavy pull filled him with quiet satisfaction. 700 galleons, payment for half a month's toil in the old forests of the Jura Mountains in France, where he had endured hunger and cold beneath the open sky, a sum equal to a year's salary for a Hogwarts professor or a high-ranking ministry official. Once he had examined the basilisk heart, Amasta had delivered and found it flawless. Cacus closed the rough wooden box and smiled in approval. Your reputation is the brightest light in this underworld, Mr. Goldviper. Every transaction with you is nothing short of perfect. Amasta tucked the pouch away without a word, unmoved by the compliment. In the end, everyone here dealt for the gleam of gold. There was no need for talk of friendship. Any worthwhile commissions lately? As diligent as ever, Mr. Goldviper. Cacus, far from taking offense at Amasta's coldness, seemed almost pleased. In truth, most who worked these circles kept their words spare and their manners guarded. It was his own warmth and courtesy that marked him as unusual. Carcass kept his ingratiating smile firmly in place, slipping in a few quiet flatteries as he pulled a notebook from his robes and began leafing through it. As for the type of work and the payment, do you have any particular requirements? My habits haven't changed, Carcass. Don't waste either of our time, Amasta said coldly. Of course. How could I forget? You don't take contracts against either wizards or muggles. The commission must be over 500 galleons, and you want the job wrapped up as quickly as possible. I never forget a client's preferences, Mr. Viper. However, Carcass muttered aloud as he flipped through the notebook, his brow gradually creasing. Even after reaching the final page, he hadn't found a single job that fit Amasta's demands. I'm afraid I must apologize, Mr. Viper. The kind of jobs you prefer are always snatched up quickly. There was one 3 days ago, a 550 galleon task supplying ingredients for a potion to suppress magical hyperactivity. But sadly, it's already gone. At that, Amasta rose to leave without a word, moving with his usual brisk decisiveness. Wait, Mr. Viper. Carcass, who'd been setting up for this, cut in quickly. Meeting Amasta's cold gaze made the veins bulge on his forehead. He was half convinced the man would draw his wand and pin him to the ground like he had once done with those werewolves who'd broken the rules. No offense intended, Carcass rushed to explain. It's true, I don't have anything that matches your exact terms, but I do have some very well-paid contracts. Only they're somewhat higher risk. Would you be interested in hearing them? Higher risk? If Carcass Frilly, who had lived his life steeped in this place, called a job high risk, it was certainly no minor smuggling run. Amasta hesitated, but, after a moment's thought, sat back down and gave a short nod. Go on. Carcass let out a subtle breath of relief. Earning broker's fees off someone like the Golden Viper was no simple matter. You never knew what tiny misstep might offend him and cost you your life. It was best to be prepared to flee at any moment. The first commission pays 20,000 galleons. The sum alone made Amasta's brow twitch. His breath stilled. The client sent me a magical contract from Albania. He wants someone to break the Lestranges and the Caro siblings out of Azkaban. What do you think? Humph. I'm not that much of a fool, Carcass. I refuse. Amasta didn't hesitate. If it were simply rescuing prisoners, such a fortune might have tempted him. Dementors were dangerous, yes, but not beyond his ability to deal with. The real problem was who needed rescuing. No one in the wizarding world could be unaware of the Lestranges and the Caros. fanatics, the most devoted of Death Eaters. Freeing them would all but guarantee Albus Dumbledore's involvement, and Amasta had no intention of spending the rest of his life hunted. Besides, Azkaban's location was one of the wizarding world's most guarded secrets. Tracking it down alone would be a massive drain of time and effort. Carcass wasn't surprised by the refusal. In his opinion, the client who'd posted such a commission had probably downed too much fire whiskey and lost all sense. After all, who in their right mind wanted to tangle with Dementors? Your judgment is very wise, Mr. Viper. In that case, let's see. There's another. Someone claims to have located the ruins of a powerful ancient wizard's construction. Snell, he's looking to recruit skilled wizards as escorts. The pay isn't high up front, but the client promises to share whatever is found within the ruins. Would that interest you? Exploring ruins did hold the potential for immense reward. Not just gold and jewels, but long-lost forms of ancient magic, infamous for their sheer destructive force. Knowledge like that could sharpen one's own power considerably. Yet after a pause, Amasta shook his head. Not out of fear. The risk was nothing, but such expeditions demanded vast preparation and time, with a high likelihood of ending empty-handed. Amasta had no taste for staking his profit on blind luck. Carcass remained patient, introducing several other rare commissions he had kept in reserve, but each one was the same. Either the reward did not balance the risk, or completing it would bring far too much trouble down the line. And so, one by one, Amasta refused them all. In the end, even Carcass was left troubled by Amasta's constant dismissals. He sat brooding, brow furrowed, silent for a long while before finally speaking. There's one more. Just one last commission, Mr. Goldviper. If this doesn't satisfy you, then... He craned his neck slightly, studying the man before him with cautious eyes. Though the swirling veil of magic obscured Amasta's face, Carcass still strained to catch the slightest hint of reaction from this dangerous figure. Tell me, have you ever heard of Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets? The Chamber of Secrets? Amasta's body gave a faint jolt. Though the memories of his past life storylines had long faded, anyone who had studied Hogwarts could not have avoided hearing of it. In the underworld, Amasta had clashed with others often enough, and his spells and casting habits made it plain he'd been trained in modern orthodox wizardry. There was no concealing it. It's just a schoolyard legend. Why bring that up? Seeing that Amasta had bitten, Carcass hid his satisfaction, keeping his tone measured. You're rarely in the country, so you may not know. The Daily Prophet hasn't reported it, but in private, the whispers are everywhere. They say the chamber has truly been opened. Someone inside Hogwarts is using its power to spread fear, and Dumbledore is powerless to stop it. Wait. Amasta cut him off without courtesy. And what has this to do with commissions? Don't tell me someone's paying me to babysit school children? Of course not. Carcass's lips curled into a sly smile. But the name of Salazar Slytherin is enticing enough, isn't it? The client believes he left behind some hidden treasure in the chamber, now found by this so-called heir. Otherwise, how do you explain that even someone like Dumbledore can't uncover a trace? Amasta fell silent. He remembered little of the original tale, but enough to know that the chamber had held no vault of riches, no relics of great alchemy or power. Still, knowing the greed of wizards, such speculation hardly surprised him. After all, Hogwarts' 4 founders were real figures of extraordinary might, their power far beyond the reach of common folk. Should any of their legacies resurface, the masses would surely swarm to claim them. Even if that were true, Amasta said flatly, who dares storm into Hogwarts and wrestle Dumbledore for it? You'd have better luck raiding Azkaban for lunatics. Not theft, something more reasonable. Carcass leaned forward, his eagerness plain, determined to sway him. I can arrange it so you enter Hogwarts as an external investigator appointed by the Board of Governors. The governors need to show they're responding to the attacks to quiet the growing unrest. Yet at the same time, they fear sending their own wizards only to see them fail and become laughingstocks. But with a reliable wizard, they'd be willing to deal with Dumbledore. After all, his handling of the matter has been disappointing. Some of them think he's grown old, too slow to act. So, you had me in your sights from the start. If Amasta hadn't realized it by now, he would have been a fool. Those earlier high-risk commissions were bait. This was the real aim, and indeed he had seen right through it. Carcass stiffened, then forced a humble smile. The investigator must be approved by Dumbledore himself. That means a Hogwarts alumnus, someone with strength and credibility. Down here, only you meet the mark. Amasta gave no answer, neither refusal nor assent. And how do you plan to handle secrecy? He asked at last. You must know this would reveal my true face. Ever shrewd, Cacus Folly had already prepared for that objection. He hurried to reassure him. The client will never know the commission was taken by the Gold Viper. The board may be aware of your name in the wider world, but from me, they'll learn nothing of your dealings here in the underworld. Then what about you? Amasta pressed, his tone sharp. In your scheme, you're the only one who would know both my identities, the one above ground and the one below. So how do you guarantee you're trustworthy? An unbreakable vow, Carcass replied smoothly, sworn on the lives of every member of the Frilly family to keep your secret forever. Amasta's pale eyes bored into Carcass's not-so-young face. He didn't answer at once. Seems to me you're set to gain a great deal from this commission, aren't you? That would fall under my private business, Mr. Viper. Carcass smiled like a man already holding victory in hand. 8,000 galleons, the gratitude of the school's board of governors, perhaps even commendation from the ministry, and in the bargain, a chance at the treasure hidden in Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. Mr. Viper, this deal is more than worth it. Chapter 4. Before the grave days of relentless snowfall had buried the grime of London's old streets under a cold white shroud. Yet the oppressive sky, never once breaking clear, seemed to promise an even greater blizzard brewing above. Along the worn roads, weary Muggle workmen strained to carve narrow passageways through the snow. In the courtyard of a bare, leafless plot stood Amostar Brain, clad in a threadbare, dark green coat. He stared intently at the unfinished building before him, a glimmer of uncommon magic in his pale violet eyes. Unlike the weathered, time-worn buildings all around, this one was square, stark, and graceless. A 6-story block that looked more like a student dormitory, each floor with over a dozen rooms. When it was done, it would house many. Amasta! The call from the street gate shook him from his thoughts. He turned to see a middle-aged woman hurrying toward him. His young face broke into a warm, gentle smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Regan." "Oh, you should have told me ahead of time, Amasta," she scolded after their quick embrace. He gave a rueful smile. "Ah, apologies. I hadn't meant to come in such a rush. Something's come up that may keep me away for months, so I wanted to check on the progress while I could." Yes, always in a rush, you," she said, though pride gleamed in her eyes as she studied the handsome young man, the brightest success to ever leave the orphanage. "You needn't worry. Mr. Parker from the building crew promised the work will resume right after Christmas. 2 months, he said, and the children will have their new home." "That's just what they've been hoping for." Amasta smiled faintly. He unlatched the case he carried, took out 2 neat bundles of pound notes, and pressed them into Mrs. Regan's hands. Gringotts did offer to exchange wizarding coin into Muggle money, but the rates were appalling, and the limits strict. Amasta preferred to melt his galleons into bars and trade them at one of London's less reputable gold shops. It meant taking a loss, but still less costly than dealing with goblin greed. "This is the remainder of the payment. Please see that Mr. Parker gets it." Her lips trembled, but she didn't bother with words of thanks. She'd said them too many times already. Instead, she tucked the money carefully into the oil-stained folds of her apron, her voice touched with gratitude and hope. "Will you go see the children, Amasta? They've been longing to see you, especially little Hammer. He's been grumbling for days that you broke your promise to spend Christmas with them. Give him my apologies, Mrs. Regan. I'll bring him a gift when I return for the summer." "All right, then. If you take something that belonged to someone else, you have to see their affairs through. Call it common decency. Looks like I missed a good show, Mr. Goldviper?" Amasta turned his head toward the voice. Beneath the tall notice board stood a middle-aged wizard with blonde hair and black eyes, a friendly-looking man who offered him a smile. "Or perhaps you were simply lucky enough to avoid a bit of trouble." Amasta nodded once, expression cool. The man was Cacus Folly, a somewhat well-known broker in the underworld from the Folly family, one of the Sacred 28. Once the Follies had enjoyed great prestige in the wizarding world, at their height, a family head even served as Minister for Magic. unquestionably among the realm's elite. But sadly, Hector Fawley, who held the post then, lacked far-sighted strategy. He ignored Albus Dumbledore's warnings and badly misjudged the damage the first Dark Wizard, Gellert Grindelwald, would bring to Britain and indeed to all of European magic. For that mistake, furious wizards removed him from power. Deprived of political shelter, the Fawleys were devastated and gradually faded from Britain's magical scene. For 2 or 3 generations, the fallen families sought a way back to the center stage, trying every route, always failing, because at every road's end stood a figure no one of their time could overcome. Dumbledore himself had never struck directly at the disgraced Fawleys, but the wizarding world had not forgotten that it was Hector's refusal to heed Dumbledore that led to Britain's heavy losses against Grindelwald. 50 years passed and the anger toward the Fawleys waned, but Albus Dumbledore still lived. The current power holders at the Ministry, wary of that century-old headmaster, had no reason to risk angering the greatest wizard of the age over a family that should have been buried in history's dust. In the end, the Fawleys surrendered to Shadow. They sent one of their relatively few presentable heirs into the underworld, willing to risk exposure and revenge, to quietly build wealth and connections while waiting for an opportunity to return to the light. A new commission. Amostar weighed the pouch in his hand. The bag had been given extra space by an undetectable extension charm. Even so, after a floating charm dulled the heft, it still felt pleasantly heavy. 700 galleons, payment he'd earned by weathering wind and hunger for half a month in the old forests of the Jura Mountains in France, enough to equal the annual salary of a full professor at Hogwarts or a senior ministry official. After checking the heart of the cockatrice-tailed beast Amostar had brought and finding it flawless, Cacus shut the rough wooden box and smiled with satisfaction. Your reputation is the brightest light of this underworld, Mr. Goldviper. Every deal with you is a perfect pleasure. Amostar quietly pocketed the coin pouch, unmoved by Cacus Folly's praise. Everyone out here was after the same shining galleons. No need to pretend to be friends. Any decent commissions lately? Amostar asked. You're as industrious as ever, Mr. Goldviper, Cacus replied. Amostar's coldness didn't seem to bother Cacus. Most people who operated down here spoke cautiously. A man like Cacus, polite and warm, was the exception. At last, even Cacus grew troubled by Amostar's picky silence. He sat there worried, brow knotted, and after a long pause said, There's one more. Just one last job, Mr. Goldviper. If you can't be satisfied. He craned his head, speaking carefully. Though he couldn't see the expression behind Amostar's veil of twisting magic, he still watched the dangerous man across from him as best he could. Have you heard of Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets? The Chamber of Secrets? Amostar's body trembled. Even though much of the storyline from his previous life had faded, anyone who'd been to Hogwarts would have heard the name. Amostar's fighting style and spell work plainly marked him as a product of modern, orthodox magical education. There was no hiding it. It's just a Hogwarts legend. Why bring it up? Amostar asked. Seeing he'd bitten, Cacus hid his delight but kept his voice steady. You don't spend much time in the country, so you might not know. The Daily Prophet hasn't printed it, but rumors are flying. They say the chamber really has been opened. Someone inside Hogwarts is using the chamber's power to spread terror, and Dumbledore is helpless. Wait. Amostar interrupted bluntly. What does this have to do with a commission? Are you saying someone's paying me to go and protect those children at the school? Of course not, Cacus said with a sly smile. But the name Salazar Slytherin is enticing, isn't it? The client thinks Slytherin left some secret treasure in the chamber that his so-called heir has found. Otherwise, how do you explain that even someone like Dumbledore can't find a trace? Amostar fell silent. He didn't remember all the old book plots, but he did recall that the chamber hadn't been known for riches. No legendary wealth, no overwhelming alchemical artifacts. Still, given wizards' greed, such guesses were unsurprising. After all, the 4 founders of Hogwarts were historic witches and wizards of tremendous power. Any legacy of theirs would draw crowds. Even if it were true, Amostar said unmoved, who'd storm Hogwarts to steal from Dumbledore? You'd be safer raiding Azkaban for lunatics. Not theft, something more legitimate. Cacus leaned forward, eager to persuade. I can help you enter Hogwarts as an external investigator appointed by the Board of Governors. The governors need to show they're responding to these attacks to calm rising unrest, yet they fear sending their own wizards and becoming a laughingstock. With a reliable wizard, they'd be willing to negotiate with Dumbledore. After all, his handling of these incidents has been disappointing. Some of them think he's getting old, a bit slow. So you've had your eye on me all along. If Amasta hadn't realized it by now, he'd been foolish. Those earlier high-risk jobs had been bait. Cacus's real aim was to land this final commission. Caught, Cacus's smile turned humble. The investigator needs Dumbledore's approval, so a Hogwarts alumnus is preferred. Strength and reputation matter. Down here, only you fit the bill. Amasta didn't deny it. How will you keep my identity secret? You know this would expose my true face. Cacus, quick as ever, already had an answer. He rushed to reassure him. The client will never know the Gold Viper took the job. The board may know your name in the wider world, but they'll learn nothing from me about your dealings in the underworld. Mrs. Regan's tone held obvious disappointment, but she didn't press further. She knew that if Amasta had the time, he wouldn't refuse to check on the children. Clearly, he had pressing matters to settle. Their brief exchange didn't take long. Mrs. Regan had to hurry back to care for the hungry little ones, and Amasta stayed only a short while longer before leaving the desolate yard. He walked with steady steps east along the recently cleared main street. The old buildings, full of memories from his childhood, did nothing to slow him. Only as he passed a 10-foot-wide river did he pause on a shabby arched bridge to stare out at the freezing surface, then continued toward a wasteland dotted with sparse birch trees. In the center of that waste stood a graveyard fenced with leaning pickets. Whirlwind, sweep clean. Amasta didn't take his hand from his pocket. His lips moved, and a few small dust devils rose from the barren cemetery. They brushed snow from rows of tombstones and the black-gray pebble islets, then vanished without sound. Sorry, Grandma Ferlena, I forgot to bring flowers. He stepped to a pristine headstone, brushed ice and water from the carved marble tablet, straightened, and stared quietly at the black and white photo of the smiling old woman. He murmured softly. Beneath that stone lay the elder who had lovingly cared for him in the orphanage when he was a child, the only kin he had acknowledged since his infant arrival in this world. Sensing his sorrow, an owl that had braved the biting wind did not rush its task. It perched on a nearby birch and tilted its head, watching Amasta, preening feathers ruffled by the gusts. In a few months, I'll be back at school that teaches people to do tricks. The school's in a bit of trouble. Some hope I can find something during the chaos. To be honest, this isn't really my wish. Albus Dumbledore, that white-bearded old man, who always pretends to bump into me in the library at midnight to tell me not to stay up, won't like what I'm about to do. I don't relish sneaking about under his nose, but they're paying too well. It's worth half a year of my toil. The cold wind carried his resigned sigh away, but could not wipe the frustration off his handsome face. If only I could remember the story properly, I could finish the job quickly and walk away with the money. That light sentence betrayed the deepest secret the young man kept in that barren graveyard. Yes, Amostar Brain was not truly native here. His soul had come from a blue world with no supernatural power. The Harry Potter books had been his beloved reading in his previous youth, but 20-odd years had passed since he received his Hogwarts acceptance. Most memories blurred. Even when, 10 years earlier, an owl delivered the letter to his cold orphanage room, he assumed it was some cruel new prank. Only when a greasy-haired gutter rat turned his bed into a toilet with a little stick did he wake to the reality that his life this time was not some urban fantasy script. He tried desperately to recall the Harry Potter narrative: soul relics, sacred objects, love and scars, Voldemort and resurrection. But the fragments he recovered were vague and unreliable compared to the information he'd gathered firsthand since entering the wizarding world. He even tried abnormal methods to retrieve memories, but those memories were stubbornly hidden in a shifting gray fog, as if someone had magically sealed them away. After many attempts and nearly undoing himself, he'd had to give up. That Potter boy is only in his second year and has many years until graduation, so I shouldn't have to face the worst danger. After all, Dumbledore is there. No, the danger may come from Dumbledore. He exhaled. exhaled. Watching his breath vanish in the air, Amasta's bitter smile hardened. No matter which world, survival is brutally hard, right, Grandma Ferlena? Snow began to fall finer and softer. The owl on the treetop began to trill impatiently. Amasta held out his hand. A small paper slipped from beneath the owl's talon, slicing through the gray veil of snow and landing neatly in his palm. Open quote, Respected Mr. Brain, I have concluded negotiations with the Hogwarts Board of Governors. The board has approved our proposal. You are required to arrive at Hogwarts before 8 p.m. tonight and present to Dumbledore in person how you intend to investigate and identify the perpetrator of these attacks. Close quote. Lucius Malfoy had flatly rejected the proposal to send investigators. In his view, Albus Dumbledore ought to be dismissed outright. The Greengrass family alone seconded the motion. Yours faithfully, Carcass Flea. The hasty, jagged scrawl betrayed the urgency of the writer. The gray owl, cheated of a treat for completing its errand, gave a disgruntled screech before spreading its wings and vanishing into the drifting snow. Amasta closed his hand. The slip of parchment shimmered, then sprouted into a pure white carnation in his palm. Do you like that little trick, Grandma Freyna? The smiling elder on the gravestone seemed to nod in approval. Amasta smiled back, then turned into the storm. With a sharp crack, the lonely graveyard was empty once more, save for a single low oath drifting through the sparse trees. Fate's train, are you ready to run into the unknown? Chapter 5, The Interview, Part 1. Through centuries of storms and snow, the ancient castle still exuded its aura of mystery. During the Christmas holidays, Hogwarts was far quieter than usual. The long corridors echoed only with the muttering of painted figures in their frames, the clank of armored sentries, and from time to time, Peeve's shrill singing ripping through the stillness. Severus Snape's strides were so sharp and swift that his robes billowed like the wings of a great bat forced to run on its feet. His face, drawn and pale-lipped, left no doubt as to his foul mood. Iced lemon juice. The squat stone gargoyle leapt hastily aside at the password, fumbling as though cowed by something greater. Snape swept into the splitting wall, and the instant he stepped into the circular office hidden beyond, his temper soured even further. There sat Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, reclined in his chair. Behind the crescent-shaped spectacles, his fathomless blue gaze rested on the high, arched ceiling. His long fingers were laced together atop a desk, cluttered with curious alchemical devices and stacks of unanswered letters. Where have you been? Snape's eyes flicked to the purple travel cloak still draped around Dumbledore's shoulders, his tone curt, almost accusatory. Only out for a walk, Dumbledore replied, lowering his gaze with a mild smile. You know, Severus, for a man of my years, it's rather important to keep a little exercise. No doubt, Snape sneered faintly. A stroll that's lasted several days. It was the response Dumbledore expected. He only smiled and changed tack. How is Miss Granger faring? Stable enough. Pomfrey treated her correctly. With a few weeks of rest, she'll be fine. Snape's tone was stiff, but at least he gave the truth. Yet when he saw the look of quiet relief on Dumbledore's face and realized the headmaster meant to let the matter rest, his anger broke loose. I should think you're perfectly aware of what those self-important Gryffindors have been up to. Brewing polyjuice potion in secret, daring to steal ingredients from my stores. Dumbledore, since when did this school grow so forgiving? When did breaking rules and stealing a professor's property become permitted? Such behavior is never permitted, Dumbledore said warily, as if Snape's relentless fury weighed on him after a long journey. He removed his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. But we must look not only at actions, but at the intentions behind them. That is how we know whether their hearts are base as well. Severus, I do not believe Harry, Mr. Weasley, or Miss Granger's wish to uncover the truth of the attack springs from anything ignoble. So you mean to simply stand by, even if his reckless behavior puts him in danger? For some reason, Snape's face looked paler in the gentle firelight. He hadn't spoken the boy's name aloud, yet he was certain Dumbledore understood exactly who he meant. The office fell silent. Only the faint snores of past headmasters in their portraits and Fawkes's clear, delicate cries broke the stillness. It isn't neglect, Severus, it's observation. After a long pause, Dumbledore spoke again, but without his usual quiet certainty. Indeed, the line between courage and recklessness is not always clear, but with the young, we should lean toward forbearance, Severus. That way, we avoid stifling the very qualities they are born with. Forbearance? Snape's lip twitched. Against his will, memories of his own school years here crept back. Don't flatter yourself, headmaster. You've only ever been tolerant with students you favored. All his hatred for James Potter and all his longing for Lily Evans tangled themselves around Harry. He was bound to protect the son of the woman he loved, yet forced to endure the boy's uncanny resemblance to the man he loathed. The contradiction left his feelings twisted beyond measure. Let's leave this subject, Severus. Since Harry Potter's arrival at the school, such conversations had happened too many times to count. Even Dumbledore was weary of them. Would you be so kind as to meet a guest at the gate for me? Dumbledore rose, brushing at his robes. In their present state, they were hardly fit for visitors. Normally, I'd ask Minerva, but she's accepted an invitation from the Transfiguration Today editors to attend a symposium, an evening of rare leisure for her. I'd rather not disturb it. Snape had no interest in Dumbledore's private meetings. He turned on his heel, striding toward the door, his expression darker than when he had entered, old memories stirring like poison in his mind. Yet, as if compelled, he stopped short before leaving, turned back, and eyed Dumbledore suspiciously as the old wizard flicked mud from his hem with a wand. Who are you meeting? Ah, well, I had meant for you to discover the surprise at the gate. But since you ask, Dumbledore smiled. His blue eyes gleamed again with that unfathomable light. Amostar Brain, the student you've admired most these past years. December 31st, 7:40 p.m. The express train had carried Amasta to Hogsmeade Station. From there he trudged a long, snow-laden path until he stood before Hogwarts's great iron gates. The winged boar statues, guardians of the entrance for 1,000 years, loomed in their eternal vigil. Through the bars, Amasta's gaze swept past the Quidditch pitch with its 6 towering hoops, past the cliffside castle rising in shadowed majesty, and out toward the endless forbidden forest. He had to admit, returning here felt better than he had expected. I guessed on the train already. It had to be you meeting me, Professor. The rust-stained gates creaked open. Amasta stepped forward, dropping his case to open his arms with a genuine smile as the tall, black-clad figure approached. In the dim light, Severus Snape's expressionless face took form. Chapter 6, The Interview, Part 2. The bitter cold had sealed the vast surface of the Black Lake into solid ice. In the dim light, the forbidden forest swayed in the cutting wind, looking more like a rippling sea than a woodland. Last year, just before Easter, I remember you wrote to me from Greece, saying you were exploring the ruins of an ancient wizard there. You even sent me 5 pints of dragon's blood and 40 ounces of dragon liver. Amasta walked beside Snape toward the castle looming on the cliff's edge. As they passed the 3 towering goalposts on the pitch, Amasta's eyes strayed toward the flickering firelight in Hagrid's hut. Snape, watching him sidelong, took in the deeper cast of his features compared to the youth who had graduated barely 3.5 years before. His voice was unreadable as he added, "But then the Daily Prophet reported something curious. Norway's Ministry of Magic claimed someone had broken into their dragon preserve, stolen a precious Norwegian Ridgeback egg, and slaughtered a Norwegian red in front of 2 unfortunate muggles who had stumbled in. Amasta, I trust these 2 events are entirely unrelated." "And what do you think, my professor?" Amasta pulled his gaze back from the distance, fixing on the 1 tower window glowing with firelight amid a row of darkened panes. He smiled slightly. "Or perhaps, what kind of answer is it you'd like from me?" Snape's lips curled in their habitual sneer, but as the words formed, a realization struck him. This young man was no longer the poor, withdrawn student who avoided bonds with classmates, burying himself in his own world. He had grown into a wizard Snape himself could no longer easily see through. "It doesn't matter to me," Snape said at last, his tone low. "I only mean to remind you. The warm reunion Dumbledore had likely imagined between pupil and teacher never happened." Snape hunched his shoulders and strode toward the castle, adding without looking back, "I hope you know exactly what you're doing. And I hope you know this school is not nearly as calm as it seems, especially these last few years. If you still value your old preference for keeping to the shadows, then keep to it, especially around Dumbledore. My advice, leave here as soon as you can. Leave Britain's magical world altogether. When the dust has settled, come back. If your mind is still as sharp as it was, you'll understand perfectly what I mean. Perhaps their movements tonight had been too ordinary, for the stone gargoyle at the office door gave a barely hidden grimace as it slid aside. Thank you for the warning, Professor. Snape made no move to enter. As Amostar passed him, he gave a soft chuckle. I've always known exactly what I was doing, and I'm well aware of the risks. Inside, Dumbledore had already changed into a clean, stately set of robes. He had clearly anticipated his visitor's arrival. As the wall sealed shut and Amostar stepped in, the headmaster was already rising from behind his desk, smiling warmly. Good evening, Headmaster Dumbledore. Amostar had prepared himself, but still, when those bright, steady eyes, burning with the distilled wisdom of a century, fell on him, he felt the skin of his face tighten and his heartbeat quicken. In the fire basin, Fawkes stirred, stretching his neck from a bed of ash, curious at the familiar voice. 30 feet away, the tall, spare figure swathed in firelight was more than a vessel of vast oceanic magic. His legendary life itself was a living chronicle of Europe's modern wizarding history. In the presence of such a man, it was hard to imagine how even the first and second Dark Lords had managed to withstand him as long as they had. Welcome, welcome, Dumbledore said, extending his hand as Amostar approached. His penetrating gaze passed across the young man's face, pausing only briefly on those pale violet eyes before shifting to the snow-dusted gray in his hair. Good evening, Amostar. I'm sorry you've had to travel in such dreadful weather. As compensation, may I offer you a drink? Thank you. That's exactly what I need. Guided by Dumbledore, Amostar took a seat. The headmaster himself moved to a nearby bookcase, opened the cupboard that held his pensieve, and drew out an old bottle from a hidden compartment. For the sake of my health, I've had to hand over most of my collection to Poppy, Dumbledore said, holding it up with a faintly mischievous smile. But this one, well, Amostar, I've never shared it with anyone before. Ogden's Old Fire Whiskey, over 80 years, priceless. Catching the rich aroma that filled the air, Amostar smiled faintly. Thank you for your generosity, Headmaster. This alone makes the journey worth it. Time had deepened the whiskey into a potent, velvety spirit. Amostar sipped it slowly, waiting for warmth to return to his stiff fingers. Dumbledore didn't rush the conversation. He simply watched Amostar with that gentle gaze, asking no questions, yet seeming already to know what he wanted, and by the look in his eyes, finding the answers satisfactory. Severus tells me you've spent the past 2 years following in the footsteps of great wizards of the past, searching out magic long buried by time. When Amostar's cheeks flushed again from the drink and the warmth, Dumbledore smiled. I'm glad that after leaving this school, you've continued to study and improve yourself. It reassures me that my years of holding to certain principles here weren't in vain. Hogwarts, at least for a few, teaches that there are places in the magical world worth seeking beyond the ministry's halls. He made no mention of the board's appointment or the Chamber of Secrets. That surprised Amostar, who had prepared explanations and strategies in advance. In my day, young wizards didn't rush to find careers right after school. They'd take a graduation journey first, see the world. Before I left, I planned with an old friend to visit Greece in search of creatures from legend and to Egypt to study the work of alchemists. But fate intervened, the plan was broken, and I've regretted it all my life. Dumbledore's gaze grew distant, softened with memory. Perhaps that choice was tied to my Muggle heritage. Amostar set down his glass. Though he smiled in polite agreement, inwardly he was unsettled. Before coming, he had rehearsed countless times how this conversation might unfold. In those scenarios, the inscrutable man behind the desk would press him about his past 2 years, refusing to be swayed by simple words. Perhaps, like Snape, he'd demand to know Amostar's true purpose in returning. Perhaps he'd probe the matter of the chamber attacks, even challenge the countermeasures Amostar had prepared. But now, Dumbledore seemed uninterested in any of that. He only wished to talk. Could that be real? Amostar didn't believe it for a moment. Caution sharpened within him, though outwardly he appeared engaged with the headmaster's musings. Children from wizarding families take magic for granted, but those of us raised among muggles know how precious it is, how miraculous it feels to create wonders with just a flick of a wand. Compared to that, power and wealth seem trivial. No false modesty, Amasta. Many children come from Muggle homes. Few, however, pursue knowledge with such reverence and persistence. That is your gift. The explanation pleased Dumbledore. From behind the half-moon spectacles, his deep eyes glimmered with approval. Most importantly, even after all your experiences, you still describe magic as a miracle rather than power. He winked with a playful smile. When you studied here, Severus often voiced concern over your research into the dark arts. It led, as you recall, to several of our chance meetings in the library's restricted section late at night. Amasta nearly choked on his sip of whiskey. Wiping his lips, he gave a sheepish smile like a child caught out by a parent. That you'd remember such small things, Headmaster. I was never enamored with the dark arts for their strength. I only believe that whether light or dark, magic is magic. All of it is worth study, worth learning from. To reject one side blindly only reveals our own ignorance. Indeed, indeed, very wisely said. Dumbledore nodded, approving. But his expression soon turned grave. Not everyone has such self-knowledge and restraint, Amasta. That is why, in truth, Severus's concern for you was justified. Chapter 7. The Cat-Eared Girl. A little past 11 at night, Amasta finally left Dumbledore's office after their long discussion. His cheeks felt stiff from keeping a polite smile for so long. Even though Dumbledore was no longer in sight, his expression still looked as if he were smiling. Well, that was life. Nothing shameful about wearing a pleasant mask to get by. They had spoken for over 3 hours, yet he still couldn't figure out why Dumbledore had summoned him. Looking back, Amasta realized the headmaster had never actually given him a chance to present any sort of proposal. Instead, Dumbledore had led the conversation, wandering through every corner of thought, like two old friends chatting idly over drinks after years apart. His only tangible gain was the half-full bottle of whiskey that Dumbledore had generously pressed into his hands. It made no sense at all. Such easy trust didn't fit with the famously cautious character of Albus Dumbledore. The corridors were deserted, figures in the paintings along the walls soundly under torchlight. Even Argus Filch, usually tireless in his patrols, had taken leave during the Christmas holiday to visit old acquaintances. The wind that blew in through the stone windows was still knife-sharp, though the snow had stopped. Through heavy piled clouds, a pale moon struggled to break free. At a stairwell window, Amasta lingered, gazing into the distance. On this starless night, the Forbidden Forest was nothing but a dark, formless mass. Only the flicker of firelight from Hagrid's hut glimmered faintly against the endless black. I'm honestly surprised you walked out of Dumbledore's office alive, Amasta. I was already wondering what sort of funeral arrangements I'd need to make for you. Snape leaned against the wall in the shadows of the stairwell corner, clad in plum-colored nightrobes, his eyes fixed on the whiskey bottle in Amasta's hand, his sneer cutting deep. Or perhaps Dumbledore's skill at legilimency has grown so weak that he's resorted to Veritaserum to drag your sins from your tongue? Your words are as sharp as ever, Professor. Amasta turned, smiling into the shadows. The headmaster didn't use Veritaserum on me. Still, it seems he's managed to get exactly what he wanted out of me. Shh. A shaft of moonlight traveled countless miles to slip through the ward's iron bars, laying long, narrow rectangles across the hospital floor. Lumos. Hermione, making sure Madame Pomfrey had gone back to her room for the night, cracked open her eyes. She wriggled deeper into the blankets and drew out a copy of Common Magical Ailments, which Harry had borrowed from the library at her request. Pomfrey had promised her that within a few weeks the fur on her face would vanish entirely. But Hermione wanted a faster solution. She had no idea how she could possibly explain the fine whiskers sprouting from her cheeks to the friends and classmates who would inevitably come to visit. Perhaps it was some residual influence of the animal's instincts from her botched transformation. But she lay curled like a real cat, her pale hands curled unconsciously like paws on the open pages. Beneath the blanket, a long, slender tail slipped free, swaying lazily over the edge of the bed. Suddenly, footsteps outside made her tufted ears snap upright. In an instant, she dismissed the idea of Harry or Ron sneaking in, or even Madame Pomfrey making her rounds. Terror stiffened her whole body. The attacker behind the Chamber of Secrets incidents, had they come for her? She snuffed out her wand light, fell back against the pillow and clutched her wand tight under the blankets. Very little in this school ever escapes Dumbledore's notice, Professor. Are you certain he knows nothing? You may call him sanctimonious, but he would never